Looks like Jesse might be ready to give an update. I was wondering if you wanted to go over some of the stuff that we talked about in Cognition Futures.
Uh, yeah. And there's let me get to that because my mind that's like the bottom of the list right now.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in talking about that, and I do want to I want to ask you about that because I want to center some points because I know you and as it we, if you will, have more to say about that paper. So it was a very interesting paper, but I'll kind of work up to that. To go through my week, we had Beaver Worm, we had a number the cohort meetings are going very well, and um, they're kind of forming some clusters as well. Like what people are working on in data and direction, for example, are kind of establishing into three major clusters. One of them sort of the policy cluster, where we're just looking at what has happened in the big tech, basically major AI labs and policy from the DoD stuff to um, some of the internal policy disputes. Different people are looking at different aspects of that. Um, there is the agent characteristics, which kind of fits with a little bit of what we talked about today, but just looking at some specific parts. One of the interns, Violet, is looking at moral AI, which is different than it's a very specific topic around um, moral operation, performance, and evaluation internal structure of the agent that way. Kind of very cognitive science type lens. I think Violet has a background in cognitive science, so that's why. And another one of the major impetuses that I'll kind of just allude to and not get into for the multi-agent. I want to get multi-agent meeting, is Alicia's work on originally inspired by sort of community of agents or community of user human encounters um, as a unique or as a particular lens on either regulation or maintaining particular let's say bounds. Uh, so that's creating sort of like this in intra agents and inter agent characteristics and community structures that lead to some of the what are the regulatory implications of specific things in those domains. So you have like policy cluster, the agent characteristic or community characteristic cluster, and then also today I actually just met with the sort of middle ground, which is a little bit in between. We have a cluster that is basically examining frameworks, particularly at the design level, but the RAF paper, the reflection agency paper, is sort of the anchor to that again, and the individual was inspired by that. So we're basically looking at that and looking at other things, and they have ongoing experience in another role that they're in, where they're using at enterprise level certain clusters of tools. And so it kind of is an interesting hybrid opportunity of they're using it professionally in industry in certain cases and having to like teach and show other people how to use some of them while doing sort of this research side with us that is looking at frameworks for advising how to do designing for good uses or ethical uses or flourishing type things. So that's sort of an interesting cluster in the data and direction space that's emerging. We've had our second or third cohort meeting. We're a little bit behind where Google Summer Code is, but we're kind of the same general pathway of we're kind of into it now, and we're just sort of turning around the initial bend and like, okay, like these things have kind of gotten legs now and they're moving and growing and not being static anymore. So that's a very interesting thing, and I'm very proud of that cohort for doing that, staying with us and getting to that place. So that's data and direction. And what's been interesting is the overlap between some things there and some things here. And by that I mean like the lab proper. By that I mean some of the multi-agent stuff. Violet, who's sort of the cognitive science background, is not really. It's not a very short vacation for like graduation fun and stuff like that. Otherwise, I would totally insert them into the Cognition Futures meetings proper, which we can talk to soon. Violet's super interested in. I did a little preview of Cognition Futures and what we've been looking at, some Varela stuff from embodiment stuff, some of the previous things we talked about, and it was very in line with her interests. So that may be something ahead as well. What else do I have to say? I'm trying to go through the week and think about stuff. Wednesdays are very busy days for me, but I'm very happy to have, if we can all meet Wednesday and do Cognition Future stuff, then that's excellent. We kind of ran out of time for some things to get to the paper today, but we can talk about that a little bit soon. And the only other thing I'll say is Diginest was very nice yesterday. We had some more, I don't know how to really call them. Basically, Diginest, as the public-facing version of Diginest as a discussion series, is Avery, myself, and Molly as these sort of co-hosts. And we talk about papers and related things. It's a little bit less structured than a seminar series, but not as structured as like, I don't want to call it a podcast. That feels a little bit off to me. Maybe that's just personal preference, but it's a discussion series. It's a public-facing discussion series. We had some new people join us over the last week or two as non-hosts, as sort of, I don't want to say audience members, but something more like in-house people stopping by, which has been very good. What we did a lot of like, I think we had the most sort of coherent, what is Diginest? We spent a little bit of time introducing Diginest relative to what else is going on in the JoPro, the broader community, at Orthogonal Lab, and all this other stuff. But we had a very nice time of like going through what it is and what we've been doing over the last 6 or 7 months. So, and that was that should be recorded and recorded pretty well. So I'll be able to show many people who haven't been able to attend, hey, like, what are we doing? What have we looked at? Just some papers, but also project ideas. How does this fit with everything else? And I think it was a nice mutual exchange between Avery and myself. We wish Molly was there, but we might see Molly in a few weeks when she comes to a Boston event in July. But it was a very good of like, I don't know, a major sense of, okay, a lot of things are taking shape more fully this week. So positive stuff to that end. I feel like there's one or two things I'm missing as well, and I can't quite remember what they are, so maybe they'll pop up. But otherwise, we can jump into Cognition Futures and the paper for the reading group this week. I don't know if do you have things you want to just say, or like, I know there was stuff you kind of wanted to say, but we ran out of time. We basically just loosely covered like the not fun parts of the paper where they're setting up their argument. And the next week, we're going to kind of go into what they're saying more so. But anything you want to start with?
Well, I thought it was an interesting paper from the standpoint of they approached goals as sort of this, I guess you could call it culture-bound thing. Like the idea was that goals has been approached kind of from a Western perspective when we talk about goals in cognitive science or goals in like agent systems or multi-agent systems, that sort of thing. And, so if I have a goal or a robot has a goal to do something, it's usually a motivation, and it has a certain type of sort of cultural cachet in terms of how it's structured in the mind of the agent. And so they were talking about where these Tewik states from Buddhism, and how that it's different from like what we think about in the West as a goal. And so that was interesting. And I was thinking in terms of like reinforcement learning, again, as I mentioned in the last paper, reinforcement learning is kind of built from this idea of like a certain experimental setting, right? And then it's been interpreted in a certain way. So what happens if, actually we extend our lens to, like, goals as being different types of things? And I think this paper kind of gets at it, but there's a lot more, I think, that we're going to cover.
Yeah, like I feel I really like the paper in part because let's just uh, throw myself under the bus. I'm so obsessed with teleology, purpose, and behavior, like as concepts in the 1943 paper, and just say, oh, like I'm just so fixated on that. But what I really mean, more than that, is I think it's a nice. I'm curious to read what the other folks have been doing. Avery was kind of fixated on, oh, where do the goals come from, and that's sort of like that's because that's Avery's like thing, like Avery's allostatic kinds, different regulations, non-uniformity of interpersonal, lopsidedness, etc. And that kind of took over part of the conversation. And thank you for being generous with that. But there's like like a lot of there's a lot of things that I think are. I look forward to next week's going through some of them more. And I kind of wish Amanda was there. I might try to like really seed the document so that she can have some say on some things. But like, yeah, even the broader sense of this sort of bringing awareness to, let's say, conventional reinforcement learning, and it's sort of I don't know if the right word is epistemic here or ontological more so. I always get ontology always as a phrase. I know what it is, but like when I use it, it bothers me for some reason, and so I never feel like I'm using the word ontology right. But what I mean here is when the paper pointed out designing, conceptually seeing as like reinforcement learning as you must have a descriptive layout first, and then an evaluation on top of it, as a like this is a structure to how to solve. You create a domain, you have a reward in a particular way, and you do it in this particular sequence, and in a hierarchical sequence, if you will. And it's sort of gesturing, and I don't know if they did a perfect job of this, but this sort of gesturing of, okay, like how can we, what can we do by having it be not as hierarchical, not as first this then that, but maybe more co-developed in this idea of telic states, or I think there were some questions either by Avery or Amanda or you or all of us about, well, by telic states you basically just mean affordances, or like what's the difference between an affordance state or a state where you see an affordance and a goal, or a state where you see affordances and like is that basically a telic state? Like, oh, you've seen you perceived an affordance, an opportunity in the environment, so therefore you've entered a telic state. Maybe, and feel free to correct or comment on this, but I think what I would say is like I just saying this now and walking around in my own city here. I'm reminded of uh, Johann John, and sort of RIP, not to him. I think he's doing well. I think he's like married and has a kid, and he's living that great life. But like RIP to Johann John's excellent, like inspirational Johann John's version of the Cognition Futures group, and his great lectures and the very accessible things he made about exploring some stuff. Because in one of them, I will always remember this sort of phrase, kind of like my Norbert Wiener quote. This is one I associate with Johann John. I don't know if he was quoting someone or said it himself, but basically, uh, it's not that we see differences, it's we see with differences, which is sort of along the lines of um, the Norbert Wiener alternatives quote. And in this context of here, like telic states as in the different lenses that let like the goal, the objective or the goal as I think to very charitably get at what the paper is trying to do, the goal as a means of non-hierarchically situating the environment and the reward or the goal or the end state in a way that is a little more mutually informed than, kind of doing this broader questioning work of like what can classic reinforcement learning do in the way that it's structured, the way that it's made explicit, in the way that some of it's more, I don't want to say information complete is maybe too strong, but the way that things are a little bit more structured, obviously, in relation to each other. And what are things that are alternates to that that are more, where that doesn't hold as well. And that's what a telic state might specifically comment on. So that's a lot of things. And I'm curious if you have any follow-ups to all that.
Yeah, I think the idea that, well, it goes back to what I was saying before, that we basically construct goals, right? Like it isn't that a goal just is something in the world that's like beyond us. It's like we construct it. Even like if you're a rodent and you're trying to find food, um, and you try a bunch of options and you finally lock onto a strategy that's always gets you food. That's a policy that you select. But the
Yeah.
goal, of course, is getting food. And I mean, the goal would be survival, I guess. But it's that specific goal of getting a piece of cheese, say, is something you kind of figure out. You say, oh, that's something that's positive. I'm going to keep doing that. And you'll see this with like in studies of addiction, where people talk about like the sort of reinforcement learning that happens there, where you either like kind of keep going back to the drug or you stop doing it in there. Different rewards for that are the reward structures that are involved in that. So the goal is like driven by maybe something like dopamine signaling, but the
Mm-hmm.
actual thing that you're doing in the world is constructed from what's in the world. It's a similar thing. And so that I think that was an insight from the paper, and I think that gets back to what Avery was talking about. What is a goal? A goal is something that you do in the world. It might result from different types of drives that you have internally, but externally, it's going to always be based on the situation. So
Right.
it's yeah.
It's a bit of like top down, bottom up. Like externally speaking, the goal, and this is why like I'm imagining I'm superimposing the allostatic Hines diagram here. Not because I think it's the one true diagram, but just what I think Avery was trying to get at. Even thinking about like that diagram was like 3 years old or so, and even in that sense, 3 years from ago, and from more modern discussions, there's there's a top down element of provided a for lack of better terms, a desire, an internal recognition that some change, something needs to be moved in let's say a basal affectivity type sense, or like slightly above it. So, and maybe in the emotional sense, as Fuchs would say, of direction setting, something has to be the internal like maybe not signal, but recognition, if you will. Something internally has to move closer to, more of, or less away from. Like more or less, like move, some kind of a generic, even scalar, like uh, just more or less of the thing. Like there's something internally that is seems to be a requirement in terms of the agent's volitional allocation, right? But from the top down perspective, it's like the environment offers a finite buffet, a finite arrangement of things. So it's sort of like, what end are you looking at? It's like, given a goal, the environment offerings will, you have like a different lens or filter on it. But given, you know, it's a little bit of chicken or egg this way, I suppose, but also like, I think to be sympathetic to some of Avery's points is that like the the source of the goal in terms of a gentle, I like what I said about vocational allotment or allocation of volitional things, in terms of like enacting a particular desire, or moving, recognizing the basic more or less of it, right? It's sort of like that there maybe is some kind of a primacy to that. But it depends, like, are you looking at, is the lens that we're trying to look at sort of the top-down external, here's an environment, what can an agent do in it, or the other, I don't want to say, I really don't like the word generative, to use that word flippantly and very sort of trendy like right now. Like, what is the, what is the mesh between that? So I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of stalling around a point that I want to make, but I'm not making it very well. Point being, I look forward to getting more deeper into the what the real meat of the paper, because we spend most of the time setting up their framing of reinforcement learning. So to be continued, perhaps.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think I get what you're saying, and it's we should follow up on that. Good stuff. Yeah, it's. Go ahead.
I think to kind of pull it, and extrapolate's not the right word, to pull this into some other, it's like the feeling of like a kid, like a child that has food on their plate they don't want to eat, and so they spread it out. That's what I mean. Like, they spread, like, oh yeah, I've eaten my food, and they try to just diffuse it, even though it's not really going anywhere. To do a version of that, there's, even in terms of the even in terms of what I was saying a few weeks, maybe months ago now, about the common currency of navigation and navigating epistemic spaces and navigating some other stuff, and the common currency is dizzy, diverse intelligence, in a sense. I think why the goal and telic states and autotelic agents, like, that's one of the glossary terms, like, autotelic agents are these things that can set their own goals, and like, I think some core things about all of this that I don't think the paper answers, but what are leading things I'm very interested in, are selection from alternatives. And I think, the merit of the goal, like, there's obviously some important things about goals, like goals and purposes, and I'm hitting the goal, and we mentioned, like, the Chan Buddhist stuff, and how it's like this generative thing as opposed to this rigid structure of, like, you have to implement this formula, and by implementing the formula you're going to get the desired result stuff. That's all has its place, but I think there's another lens of selection in and of itself, and selection from alternatives. So, like the relationship between a goal and perception of an alternative, not just because of Norbert Wiener stuff, but, like, there's a fundamental, and it may be because I don't know the literature well enough, but I see there's a fundamental, like, there's something about the perception of alternatives themselves, goals or not. Like, I think there's a difference between perceiving alternatives, and you can maybe say, well, that's affordances, but I don't know that it is in what I'm trying to say. Like, the difference between alternatives of any kind, like perception, the nature of perceiving alternatives, full stop. Affordances, which are sort of environmentally tied, and then this sort of telic states, or goal generation, and goals as the lens by which you're basically, I don't want to say generating, but the lens or the tagging that affordances or things to do from the agent into the environment are. I feel like thinking about those three things, and differentiating them, and sorting out what I'm trying to get at with my alternative fixation is something I'm excited to do. And I appreciate the paper in and of itself, but I'm kind of hoping it will continue some of my other aims in that end. So I will step away from the edge of all that, and we move on to other things.
Okay, yeah, it's a very good conversation. I think that's ties into the paper too. I was talking about some of the aspects of how agents are kind of determining a payoff for something, right? Like, what is my payoff for this thing? And then that determines how I move or what my goal is. So if I think there's a high payoff for something, I'm more likely to do it. The drive there is to get the highest payoff. But the strategy or the goal you use is different. And sometimes it's wrong. So you miss your target. But yeah,